Summer in London, 1665. Hot, humid, and long. Much like a summer here in England these days. But unlike now, back then it was hot, and people were dropping down dead in the streets from a horrible disease that nobody knew how to treat. Rats were dying too, but there was no lockdown or social distancing. In fact, many didn't even know they were being attacked by an enemy that they couldn't see, hear, or smell. The plague had arrived in London, and the people had no idea. I'm the presenter, and this is the Great Plague of London. Before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe for more plague-related content coming very soon. Rats would mysteriously drop down dead in the streets, and soon after humans would follow. It started with only a few cases, but quickly spread across London. People would go about their business as usual and suddenly collapse in the street or at work. Their skin would turn a deep red color, especially around the buttocks. They would then develop huge blisters which would burst and weep fluid. As you can imagine, this was a horrible way to die, and even worse to watch happen to someone you love. This strange illness was killing people of all ages, both rich and poor. Londoners had no idea what was happening. Was it God's punishment, a new type of consumption, or something else entirely? Today we know that the illness plaguing London was bubonic plague, and it was carried by rats. There are 3 types of plague: bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic. All 3 can be fatal, but bubonic is the most common. Symptoms include fever, chills, weakness, and painful swellings in the lymph nodes called buboes. Hence the name. These swellings are caused by the body's response to bacteria that has entered the body through the bite of an infected flea. The fleas are usually found on rats, which is how they spread so easily from person to person. Septicemic plague is when the bacteria enters the bloodstream. This form of plague is extremely rare today due to antibiotics, but historically it was just as deadly as pneumonic plague. Pneumonic plague is when the bacteria infects the lungs and is spread through the air. This type of plague is very rare and incredibly contagious. One of the deadliest outbreaks in history was the Justinianic plague, which killed between 50 and 75 million people. It is thought to have started in Ethiopia and spread along trade routes to Egypt, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. It lasted for 200 years, killing 50% of those who contracted it. In 1665, London was ripe for an outbreak. It was overcrowded and unsanitary. Most people lived in extreme poverty, and London's water supply was contaminated. Add to this the fact that there was an unusually large rat population meant that when the plague arrived, it took off. Some believe it came in on clothes and bedding brought from the east, while others believe it arrived with troops returning from the Dutch War. Others still think it may have always been there, kept in check by the River Thames. But that summer, the river was unseasonably low, and the plague began to spread. It started in the East End, where most of London's poor lived. The first case was recorded on June 1665. A man from Suffolk, who worked as a barber and lived on Pudding Street, was taken ill and died within a week. For the next few weeks, only a handful of people died each day, so it wasn't considered unusual. Then the numbers started to rise. By August, over 100 people were being buried every day. Many graveyards were full, and mass graves were dug in the grounds of churches, and in some cases, the plague pits. London's entire infrastructure was overwhelmed, and people started to panic. On August 29, 1665, the Lord Mayor of London ordered all businesses and markets to close, but this order was ignored, and life went on as normal, although burials continued to rise. During this time, one of the most infamous victims of the plague died, King Charles II's beloved dog. So desperate was the king to save his pet that he sent him away from London in the hope that he would recover. Sadly, the dog died anyway. To stop any further outbreaks, the king ordered the closure of theaters, taverns, and a ban on gatherings of more than 5 people. While these measures were put in place, Londoners were advised to wear a mask. Initially, people used cloth masks, but these were soon replaced with a special beak-like mask made out of leather or metal. These were filled with aromatic substances such as camphor, lavender, and mint, which would help purify the air. These masks also had eye holes cut into them, but these had to be covered over when indoors to prevent the good air from escaping. I don't think anyone could argue with the effectiveness of these masks. Despite the precautions, the plague continued to spread. By October, it was clear that closing businesses and banning gatherings was not going to stop it. The government decided that the best course of action was to abandon the city. They ordered everyone to leave London, which was easier said than done. While the wealthy could afford to leave the city, most Londoners did not. Many could find alternative work outside the city, and others simply did not want to leave their homes. At this point, the death toll was rising every day, and some people began to blame foreigners for bringing the illness to England. Riots broke out, targeting the French, Dutch, and, of course, the Jews. The government had to intervene and send armed guards to protect the foreign residents of London. While some fled the city and others stayed put, a small group of Londoners tried to fight back against the plague. One of these people was Henry Dirks, an ordinary man who had lost his wife and daughter to the plague. He began treating people for free and even nursed the sick in his own home. Another was a doctor who was already famous for his knowledge of plague. He published a book detailing the symptoms of the illness and how to treat it. He advised people to isolate the sick and practice good hygiene. These two men were heroes during a time of great suffering. However, there was nothing they could do to stop the plague. During its height, people were dying left, right, and center. Some of those who died included two prominent scientists, Dr. Robert Hooke and Dr. Thomas Sidney. It was estimated that over 100,000 people were infected and 15,000 died. These was about 20% of London's total population. Eventually, the weather turned colder and the plague began to subside. By the following spring, it was all but gone. After the plague hit, London was a very different city. Over the next few decades, it was rebuilt and many of the slums cleared. While the plague was terrible, it had a silver lining. With a population greatly reduced, those that remained found better jobs and living conditions. The plague had killed so many people that wages rose significantly. For example, the average wage for a bricklayer increased by almost 60%. Now we know that plagues are caused by bacteria, viruses, or fungi. But during the 17th century, people had no idea what caused illnesses. Some believed that the air itself was poisonous. Others thought that bad smells caused illnesses, and that the poor were the only ones who could be affected. You see, they believed that wealth and status protected you from illness. However, this wasn't true, as we saw in the case of the London plague. When the plague returned to London in 1666, people realized just how wrong they were. After the Great Fire of London, which destroyed much of the city, the plague returned with a vengeance. It lasted for 3 years and killed around 20,000 people. BD's point, London had learned how to deal with the plague and quickly put quarantine measures in place. People were told to stay inside and avoid close contact with others. Those who showed symptoms were separated from the rest of the population and given good medical care. These measures worked, and the plague eventually subsided. So why does the story of the plague matter to us today? Well, it matters because plagues are still a threat to us all. Pandemics are nothing new, and it's likely that they will continue to occur. In the past, pandemics were often blamed on foreigners, leading to riots and discrimination. This is still the case today, as we saw with the recent COVID pandemic. Blaming an entire group of people for a disease is not only unfair, it's dangerous. It leads to discrimination and violence against innocent people. Another lesson we can learn from the plague is the importance of listening to experts. When the plague hit London, people didn't listen to doctors and scientists. Instead, they believed that wealth and status protected them from illness. This led to the deaths of thousands of Londoners. If only they had listened to the experts, things could have been very different. Finally, the plague teaches us the importance of working together. When the plague hit London, people from all walks of life came together to fight the disease. They worked as a community to care for the sick and bury the dead. It was only through their combined efforts that they were able to survive the plague. So what can we take away from this terrifying event in history? Let's hope that we never see another plague like this again. But if we do, let's make sure we learn from the mistakes of the past.